In the hills of S.A. County, Tennessee, stands the Chamberlain Cotton Mill, a monument to wealth and influence dating back to 1863. For 3 generations, it powered political clout and social prestige. But behind its legacy of prosperity lies a chilling mystery local historians have long tried to erase. Between 1863 and 1867, 73 workers vanished without a trace. No resignations, no death records, just names crossed out in black ink as if they never existed. Strangely, each disappearance aligned with months of record-breaking cotton production. The truth began to surface in 1987 when hidden ledgers were found, sealed in a basement vault. They told a far darker story, one the Chamberlain family fought to keep buried. This tale begins in the winter of 1862, when a young industrialist named Jeremiah Chamberlain arrived in war-torn Gallatin, Tennessee. The Civil War had devastated the region. Confederate currency was worthless, Union troops controlled trade routes, and traditional industries collapsed under the weight of chaos. Chamberlain, a 28-year-old entrepreneur from Massachusetts, saw opportunity in the ruin. Unlike other northern speculators, he brought expertise from working in the textile mills of Lowell, along with letters of recommendation from Union quartermasters desperate for military supplies. Calm, impeccably dressed, and soft-spoken Chamberlain had an uncanny ability to persuade. His mill, built along Bledsoe Creek, was a state-of-the-art operation. 3 stories of red brick and imported machinery powered by water flow and northern investment. But the key to his success wasn't just technology, it was labor. While other factories struggled to find workers, Chamberlain's mill ran non-stop. He claimed to offer fair wages, housing, and a dignified work environment. The local press hailed him as proof that northern innovation and southern labor could thrive together. Yet behind the praise, odd patterns emerged. Workers came and went at a suspicious rate. Entire families moved into company housing, then vanished overnight. Chamberlain said they were war refugees, chasing news of family or better jobs elsewhere. Most locals accepted the explanation. In wartime, people had bigger concerns: raiders, food shortages, and occupation. Questioning the man who brought jobs and federal money seemed almost disloyal. Still, some noticed inconsistencies. Dr. Marcus Henley, the town's only physician, remarked he'd never been called to treat a single mill injury, an impossibility in such a dangerous environment. Sarah Poole Jennings, the postmaster, noted that mill workers never sent or received mail. Most unsettling were the quiet observations of 12-year-old Caleb Craravin, whose family's farm bordered the mill. Caleb spent his days hunting and fishing near Bledsoe Creek, where he watched workers file in each morning, but rarely saw the same faces leave. His father dismissed the concern, but Caleb saw more wagons leaving before dawn, canvas-wrapped bundles piled high, heading toward the Cumberland River, always returning empty by sunrise. He didn't know it then, but those early morning sightings would become vital clues. By winter 1863, Chamberlain's profits soared and the disappearances multiplied. Something far more sinister than cotton production was happening behind those brick walls. The first fracture in Jeremiah Chamberlain's immaculate reputation appeared on February 14, 1863, when a historic blizzard swept across Middle Tennessee. Snow fell relentlessly for 3 days, burying roads, snapping telegraph lines, and forcing even the hardiest locals to remain indoors. But for 12-year-old Caleb Craravin, trapped inside his family's farmhouse, with little more than books and a window view, the storm became an unexpected window into something deeply unsettling. From his bedroom, armed with his father's spyglass, Caleb noticed the cotton mill wasn't idle like every other business in town. On the first night, as wind howled and snow piled high against the windows, the mill remained fully lit. Silhouettes moved constantly across the illuminated panes. Work, it seemed, continued in defiance of the storm. But curiously, the nearby company housing showed no signs of life. No chimney smoke, no flickering lights, no movement. As if the buildings had been abandoned entirely. The second night brought something more disturbing. Just past midnight, during a rare lull in the wind, Caleb saw a procession of figures emerging from the mill and trudging slowly toward a storage shed at the edge of the property. The group moved with reluctance, burdened by bundles that looked like personal belongings. 4 armed men flanked them, rifles unmistakable even at a distance. This wasn't a shift change. It looked more like a forced relocation. Caleb watched until they disappeared into the shed. No lights came on. No one came out. The building remained still and silent. By dawn, when he expected to see the workers return, the shed was unchanged. On the third day, just before sunrise, Caleb saw 3 wagons leave the mill. They were piled high, covered with canvas tarps, and rolled out across the snow toward the Cumberland River, despite the dangerous conditions. When they returned hours later, the wagons were empty and suspiciously clean. Later that afternoon, as the storm cleared and roads reopened, Caleb slipped onto the mill grounds while workers were distracted clearing snow. The storage shed where the figures had vanished was now completely empty. Not just vacant, but scrubbed. No blankets, no belongings, no trace of occupancy. The scent of lye soap hung heavy in the air. It looked more like a crime scene that had been erased. But in one corner, hidden beneath a loose floorboard, Caleb discovered something that stopped his breath. A small leather child's shoe, the sole barely worn. Inside, carved into the insole with what looked like a nail or sharp metal point, were the initials M.E. and a date Feb 12, 1863. 2 days before the storm, 2 days before the procession. Clutching the shoe to his chest, Caleb raced home through the melting snow. He burst into the kitchen, pale and breathless. "P, something awful happened at the mill," he stammered. "There were people, guards, wagons." Thomas Caravan, his father, barely looked up from his evening paper. "Timothy, how many times have I told you to stay away from that place? Mr. Chamberlain's business isn't ours to meddle in." "But P, look." Caleb held out the shoe, his hand trembling. Thomas took the shoe, eyes narrowing as he turned it over. The carved initials and date were enough to drain the color from his face. "Where did you find this?" he asked. Caleb told them everything. Every movement he'd seen, every eerie silence, every vanished figure. As the story poured out, his mother Margaret grew visibly pale. When he finished, the kitchen fell into stunned silence, broken only by the ticking mantel clock. Finally, Thomas spoke. "Timothy, listen to me and listen carefully. You must not speak of this to anyone. Not your friends, not your teacher, no one outside this family. Understand?" Caleb nodded, confused. "But P, if something happened to that child, we have to tell someone." His father's voice dropped. "Sometimes asking the wrong questions is the most dangerous thing a man can do. Mr. Chamberlain has powerful friends, army contracts, government ties, more money than most counties combined. He could make all of this disappear. And you with it." Margaret finally broke her silence. "So what, Thomas? We say nothing? Pretend this didn't happen?" He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "I'm saying we tread very carefully. Because if Caleb's right, if what he saw is true, then this isn't just about a cotton mill with shady practices. It's something much worse." At that moment, a knock echoed from the front door. Through the frost-glazed window, the silhouette of a man in a dark overcoat stood waiting, his breath rising in white clouds against the cold evening air. It was Jeremiah Chamberlain himself, standing at the Caravan's door, with a polite smile that never reached his cold, steel-gray eyes. The conversation that followed in the modest parlor lasted barely 10 minutes, yet its consequences would ripple through the decades. He He spoke with his usual disarming charm. "I've been watching your boy Timothy," he said smoothly, settling into the worn armchair like a man who expected comfort wherever he went. Sharp eyes, curious mind, the kind of young man who notices things others miss. Thomas Craven felt his wife's grip tighten on his arm. "Timothy's observant," he said carefully. "Sometimes too much so." Chamberlain's smile widened, but his eyes never warmed. Curiosity is useful when properly directed. Otherwise, it becomes problematic. From his coat, he pulled a leather portfolio and placed it on the table. "I'm here with an offer, $500 for that strip of land along Bledsoe Creek, the one your son favors for fishing. I need it for water rights mill expansion. Nothing complicated. $500, nearly 3 years' income." The generosity was as suspicious as it was staggering. "That's very kind of you, Thomas," replied hesitant. "But that land's been in my family for 30 years. It's not really for sale." Something in the room shifted. The oil lamps flickered. The air grew heavier. "I understand sentiment," Chamberlain said, his tone still soft. "But progress waits for no one. My mill is the future. The only question is whether your family wants to be part of it or stand in its way." Margaret found her voice. "What exactly are you threatening, Mr. Chamberlain?" "I'm not threatening anyone. Merely pointing out patterns. The Henderson family resisted selling me their land once too. Then young James had that tragic accident with his hunting rifle." Chamberlain adjusted his gold watch chain with clinical grace. "Afterward, they were far more agreeable. Amazing how priorities shift when misfortune hits close to home." The implications settled like a weight across the room. Thomas looked at his son, who sat silent in the corner, wide-eyed, absorbing every word. The choice was clear. Accept the deal and protect his family, or refuse and risk something far worse. "I'll need time to consider," Thomas said, voice tight. "Of course," Chamberlain said, rising. "Take all the time you need. But remember, opportunities don't knock twice, and neither do second chances." 3 days later, Thomas sold the Creekside property for $500 in gold. The transaction was processed unusually fast, thanks to a courthouse clerk recently blessed with a generous donation to his church fund. But giving up the land didn't dampen Timothy's suspicions. It only deepened them. Denied his fishing grounds, he became more watchful, more determined. He altered his school routes to pass the mill, taking note of its rhythms, the arrivals, the departures, the wagons that came and went under cover of darkness. Patterns emerged. New workers arrived in small family units, often refugees displaced by war. They stayed for a few weeks, maybe months. Then they vanished. Always during the peak of production, always at night, and always followed by canvas-covered wagons rumbling toward the Cumberland River. Caleb began documenting everything. Names, descriptions, dates, all written in a private code only he could decipher. By year's end, he had chronicled 27 disappearances. But what he uncovered in December changed everything. While walking along the river's edge, he stumbled on a patch of forest ground where the snow lay strangely thin. The earth had been disturbed, freshly turned graves marked by simple numbered stakes. Not names, just numbers. Each stake cleaned the wood unstained by time or weather. Caleb counted 73 in total. 73 people buried in silence, no ceremony, no acknowledgement, just erased. The discovery chilled him to his core. This wasn't labor abuse. This was murder, organized, systematic, and shrouded in industrial secrecy. Chamberlain wasn't just exploiting workers. He was disposing of them, and no one seemed willing to stop him. Spring arrived with the Union reclaiming ground across Middle Tennessee. Trade resumed. Spirits lifted. For Chamberlain, that meant more contracts, more profit. For Caleb, it meant a surge of renewed dread. In April, a new family arrived at the mill. And this time, Caleb recognized them. The Suttons had been well known in Hartsville. Their daughter Rebecca, 16, was the eldest child of a respected Methodist preacher. Confederate raiders had destroyed their home the previous month, and they'd come to Gallatin seeking shelter and work. Chamberlain welcomed them with open arms, offering housing, wages, and stability. But Caleb knew the script. The Suttons were too familiar, too close to ignore. Based on previous patterns, he guessed they had 2 months, maybe less, before they disappeared like the others. This time he wasn't observing strangers. This time he had to act. This wasn't just any family. Caleb had seen the Suttons at church picnics, heard their voices during hymns, and watched Rebecca Sutton play with younger children under the shade of oak trees. These were people he knew, and now they were in mortal danger. Determined to uncover the full truth behind Chamberlain's crimes, Caleb took risks no child ever should. At night he crept onto mill grounds, hiding in haylofts and storage sheds, sometimes going days without sleep, just to track the secret movements that only occurred under the cover of darkness. What he found exceeded even his worst fears. Beneath the mill, through a little used entrance near the creek, Caleb discovered a basement facility that had nothing to do with spinning cotton. He glimpsed rooms that looked like cells, bare stone chambers with barred windows and reinforced doors. There was a room that resembled a medical theater: tables, surgical tools, glass vials filled with chemicals, and a reek of antiseptic so strong it burned his nose. But the most horrifying discovery came in a room filled with records. Stacked neatly on shelves were files, hundreds of them, detailing every worker ever employed at the mill. Names, physical traits, health conditions, family ties, and most chillingly, notes about their suitability for something Chamberlain called experimental purposes. Each entry was methodically labeled, many written in Chamberlain's precise slanted hand. Subject 23. John Patterson, age 34. Excellent physical condition. Suitable for endurance testing. Expired after 72 hours. Subject 31. Mary Collins, age 28. Previous typhoid exposure. Useful for immunity studies. Disposed after 2 weeks observation. Subject 41. David Reynolds, age 19. Strong constitution. Ideal for surgical procedures. Materials preserved for further study. The language was clinical. Detached. Inhuman. The kind used by a man who saw people not as lives, but as inventory. The mill wasn't just a site of forced labor. It was a laboratory one that used innocent people as disposable test subjects for grotesque medical experimentation. And Rebecca Sutton and her family were next. Desperate to prevent their fate, Caleb left anonymous warnings wherever he could. Beneath their doors slipped into laundry baskets, tucked into the folds of work aprons. Trust no one. Leave while you still can. Danger comes with darkness. Though cryptic, his warnings began to take root. Caleb watched Rebecca grow more alert, more suspicious. She asked co-workers what had happened to families who came before them. She probed gently, innocently, but not quietly enough. Word reached Chamberlain. The response was swift. On the night of June 15th, 1864, Caleb watched from the shadows as guards surrounded the Suttons' quarters. Rifles raised, they dragged the family from their beds. Rebecca screamed as she was separated from her parents and younger siblings, her cries cutting through the night like a knife. Caleb knew then the Suttons had no more time. Within days, they would vanish. Within weeks, they would become numbers among the 73 unmarked graves hidden along the river. But Rebecca Sutton was not like the others. She was bright, brave. And as Caleb would soon learn, she had a plan. Inside the mill's basement, Rebecca made a discovery. Even Caleb had missed a leather-bound journal kept by Chamberlain himself. It contained everything: names of subjects, summaries of each experiment, dates of death, and most crucially, the money trail. The mill was more than a personal operation. It was part of a sprawling network of human experimentation stretching across the South. Chamberlain had set up similar facilities in Georgia, Mississippi, and South Carolina, each disguised as textile mills or war supply depots. They had processed over 400 victims in just 2 years, and they had done so with help from physicians, government agents, and even Union Army medical officers willing to pay dearly for the data gathered through unethical human experimentation. The journal was meticulous. It included transaction logs, payoff records to local authorities, bribes to church leaders, and threats leveled against potential whistleblowers. Most damning were letters correspondence with doctors in uniform who had knowingly purchased information obtained from murdered civilians. Rebecca managed to tear out several critical pages and hide them in her clothing. She knew these pages, these thin sheets of ink-stained truth, might be the only way to stop Chamberlain and his monstrous enterprise. She didn't just want to survive. She wanted justice. But first, Rebecca had to survive long enough to deliver the stolen pages to someone who could act on them. What she didn't know was that Caleb Craven had been watching through the basement window, and that he had seen her hide the evidence. Separated by bars, walls, and armed guards, the two teenagers were now bound by a shared mission to expose the truth and stop Jeremiah Chamberlain's crimes. Together, they would form one of the most unlikely partnerships in Sumner County history. A partnership that would either save dozens of lives or cost them their own. The final phase of Chamberlain's operation began on a blistering July morning in 1864, with the arrival of a single telegram from Union Army headquarters in Nashville. The message was brief but devastating to Chamberlain's secret empire. Effective immediately, all civilian medical research contracts are subject to review. Any facility conducting human experimentation must register with the Oversight Committee and submit to inspection within 30 days. Caleb, concealed in the mill's hayloft, watched as Chamberlain read the telegram. The transformation on the man's face was startling. Confidence drained into fury, then hardened into ruthless calculation. Whatever was written on that paper had changed everything. Within hours, Chamberlain convened an emergency meeting in his private office. Caleb had long since discovered that voices carried through the ventilation ducts. Pressed against the warm wood and breathing as quietly as he could, he listened. "Gentlemen," Chamberlain began, his voice taut, "we have 30 days to erase everything." Dr. Marcus Hensley, once thought to be the town physician, now clearly a medical accomplice, was the first to panic. 30 days, Jeremiah. We have 47 active subjects. Some experiments are ongoing, some haven't even been cataloged yet. We'll conclude them all within 2 weeks, Chamberlain said flatly. Then we destroy everything. When the inspectors arrive, they'll find nothing but a cotton mill doing its patriotic duty. Caleb felt the blood drain from his face. 47 prisoners were currently held in the mill's basement, among them Rebecca Sutton and her entire family. Chamberlain was planning to murder them all to cover his tracks. But it got worse. What about the witnesses? Asked William Garrett, the foreman and Chamberlain's chief enforcer. That Craven boy's been nosing around for over a year. The postmaster's suspicious about the mail. Doc Peterson's wondering why no one from the mill ever shows up with injuries. I'm aware, Chamberlain replied smoothly. The Cravens will be offered employment at the mill this week. A generous opportunity, one they won't be able to refuse. As for the others, accidents happen. A house fire, a hunting tragedy, a fall from a wagon. Wartime is chaotic. People understand tragedy. And with that, Caleb understood. His entire family had just been marked for death. Chamberlain had tolerated their curiosity as long as it could be contained. Now, with federal scrutiny closing in, any potential liability had to be eliminated. Caleb's heart pounded. He couldn't simply run home. There was nowhere safe. Chamberlain's influence extended far beyond the county line. And even if Caleb reached the Union garrison in Nashville, he had no proof that anyone would believe. There was only one option: get into the basement, reach the prisoners, and organize a rebellion. Free them or die trying. He began preparing immediately. That night, he would risk everything. But as he slipped from the loft to make his escape, he heard one final exchange that turned fear into urgency. "When do we begin final processing?" Hensley asked. Chamberlain didn't hesitate. "Tonight. We'll start with the children. They require less preparation. Their removal will encourage cooperation from the adults. By sunrise, we'll have reduced our numbers by at least a dozen." Caleb froze mid-descent, his hands trembling. Rebecca's little brother was 8 years old. By morning, he'd be dead. Whatever courage Caleb Craven possessed, whatever fire had driven him to watch record and resist, was now being called upon in full. The boy who had spent over a year documenting evil from the shadows was about to enter the very heart of it. The basement of the Chamberlain cotton mill after midnight was a place beyond nightmares. As Caleb crept through the corridors of the mill's basement, lit only by sputtering oil lamps, he was surrounded by horrors no child should ever witness. Gaunt figures lay slumped in cells, eyes sunken, skin pale, barely human. Operating rooms reeked of blood and chemicals, their floors stained from unspeakable procedures. Shelves overflowed with specimen jars, hearts, eyes, limbs, remnants of lives, consumed by Chamberlain's experiments. But at the end of the final corridor, Caleb found what he had come for. Rebecca Sutton, alive, defiant, and still clutching the stolen journal pages. When she saw his face in the cell window, her eyes filled with relief and resolve. "Timothy," she whispered, breathless. "Thank God. I thought no one knew." "I know everything," he replied, already picking the lock with tools stolen from the maintenance shed. "We have to move. They're planning to start executions tonight." With the children, Rebecca's jaw set. "Then we don't have time for stealth. We fight our way out, and we accept the risk that some of us won't make it." They both knew this might be the end. But they were also the only hope left for each other, and for the dozens trapped with them. The rebellion began at 2:47 a.m. July 27, 1864. Caleb opened the first cell. Rebecca leaned in close and whispered to the prisoner inside, "We're getting out. All of us. Tonight." Word spread quickly, hope ignited, and rage followed close behind. The journal pages Rebecca had stolen revealed a truth more damning than anyone could have imagined. None of them had been chosen by chance. They'd been profiled, targeted for their isolation, their lack of local ties, their vulnerability. But some had powerful connections. Rebecca's uncle was a federal judge in Kentucky. One man's brother was a Union colonel. Another's father, a wealthy northern textile magnate. The records in Chamberlain's own handwriting would be the noose around his neck. The escape plan was desperate. Rebecca would lead the prisoners through the basement toward a hidden creekside exit. Caleb would create a diversion in the main building to draw the guards away. The group would then travel to the county seat where the documents could be delivered to federal authorities. But they hadn't accounted for Dr. Hensley's presence in the basement that night, conducting what he called preliminary preparations on the youngest prisoners. Hensley's shriek echoed through the corridors. "Guards, the subjects are escaping." Chaos exploded. Gunfire roared through the narrow halls. Guards stormed the stairwells. Prisoners scattered, some still shackled, others limping from surgeries. Caleb and Rebecca were separated in the confusion. But she didn't hesitate. Clutching the precious pages, she led her group down a route she had memorized during captivity, past the surgical rooms, the specimen chambers, the horrors. From behind them came Chamberlain's cold, commanding voice. "Seal the exits. No one leaves this facility alive. Dr. Hensley, terminate the remaining subjects. No witnesses." The basement became a hellscape. Yet from the depths of their suffering, the prisoners found strength. Mothers carried limp children. Wounded men propped up others. The will to survive was a fire that no scalpel could extinguish. Meanwhile, in a storage room filled with Chamberlain's most damning evidence boxes of letters, jars of organs, diagrams of unsanctioned procedures, Caleb came face to face with Foreman William Garrett. "You should have kept your nose out of this," Garrett growled, raising his rifle. But Caleb had prepared for this moment. He hurled a jar of chemical preservative at the nearest oil lamp. It shattered, igniting the room in a flash. Flames leapt across the walls, licking at shelves, racing toward the ceiling. The inferno spread instantly, consuming paper, wood, and bone-dry cotton fibers. It was the distraction Caleb needed, but it also set a deadly clock ticking. As smoke poured through the corridors and flames crept upward, Rebecca's group reached the creekside exit, only to find it blocked by 2 armed guards. Behind them, fire, ahead death. And then Benjamin Sutton, just 8 years old, tugged at his sister's sleeve. "There's a drain tunnel," he said. "I saw it during the rains. It was barely large enough for a child. Waterlogged, cracked, never meant for people. But it was something. One by one, the prisoners crawled through the narrow passage. Slippery, dark. But it led them under the mill and into the cold waters of Bledsoe Creek. Rebecca went last, clutching the journal pages wrapped in oiled cloth. She wouldn't let the truth die in the fire. They emerged into the pre-dawn gloom, smoke in their lungs, tears on their cheeks, but alive. Behind them, the Chamberlain cotton mill blazed like a pyre flames, lighting up the Tennessee countryside. Fire had devoured the building, the machinery, the records, or so it seemed. Caleb Craven emerged from the burning mill 15 minutes after the others, coughing, blistered, and shaking, but not empty-handed. Tucked inside his soot-stained jacket were 2 artifacts that would bring down a hidden empire. Jeremiah Chamberlain's personal ledger, chronicling every financial transaction tied to the atrocities, and a metal strongbox filled with correspondence from Union Army medical officers who had purchased the results of his gruesome experiments. As the survivors gathered along the banks of Bledsoe Creek, watching the inferno consume the mill, they understood that they hadn't just escaped. They had struck a decisive blow. The fire had destroyed the facility, freed the prisoners, and obliterated the machinery of death that had taken 73 lives and nearly claimed dozens more. But Chamberlain himself was gone. As alarm bells rang across the countryside and neighbors rushed toward the blaze, federal agents were summoned from Nashville. Yet the man who orchestrated the horror beneath the mill had vanished into the chaos. The question would echo for decades. Where did Jeremiah Chamberlain go, and would he rise again elsewhere? Justice for once did not wait long to arrive. Within 48 hours, federal investigators led by Colonel James Mitchell, whose own brother had vanished months earlier, arrived in Gallatin. What they uncovered left even seasoned military prosecutors reeling. Rebecca Sutton's stolen journal pages, Caleb's rescued ledger, and the testimony of 37 survivors painted a picture of calculated human experimentation hidden behind a facade of wartime industry. Dr. Marcus Hensley, captured while trying to flee the burning building, quickly turned state's witness to avoid execution. His confessions exposed a wider network of mills in Georgia, Mississippi, and South Carolina, all operating under the same model: medical experimentation disguised as textile production. The financial records revealed that Chamberlain's network had generated over $2 million in profit, an astronomical sum at the time, through the sale of preserved specimens and research data to prominent physicians across the South. Arrests followed swiftly. Doctors in Charleston, Atlanta, and New Orleans were indicted on charges of conspiracy murder and violations of medical ethics. Several Union Army medical officers were court-martialed for buying the data Chamberlain's victims had died to produce. But Jeremiah Chamberlain himself had become a ghost. Despite massive searches and rewards offered for his capture, no trace could be found. Rumors abounded. Some said he had fled to Europe. Others claimed he was living under an alias in the war-torn South. Some believed he had built another operation under a new name. The 73 victims found in unmarked graves along the Cumberland River were exhumed and given proper burial at Gallatin City Cemetery. A monument was erected with their names recovered from Chamberlain's own records. Its inscription rests in memory of those who died in the pursuit of evil disguised as progress. May their suffering never be forgotten. Caleb Craven, still a teenager, became a reluctant hero. He testified at trial after trial, helping to convict not only Chamberlain's direct collaborators, but also the enablers, suppliers, and beneficiaries who had turned a blind eye to atrocity. His secret journal, full of coded observations, became a cornerstone of the prosecution's case. Rebecca Sutton recovered from her ordeal and emerged as a national voice for patient rights and medical oversight. She testified before Congress helped pass legislation mandating federal review of human experimentation and never allowed the country to forget the cost of looking the other way. For 23 years, it seemed Chamberlain had escaped justice. And then in 1887, construction workers preparing to break ground on a new courthouse in Gallatin made a chilling discovery. Beneath the ruins of what had once been the mill's administrative offices, they unearthed a hidden chamber. Inside was the preserved body of a man in his 50s, dressed in fine clothes surrounded by gold coins, legal documents, and personal items that unmistakably identified him as Jeremiah Chamberlain. Medical examination revealed he had died from a single gunshot to the back of the head, executed at close range by someone he trusted. It was not the fire that killed him. It was betrayal. Among the documents in the chamber was a handwritten letter. To whoever discovers this record, I have been betrayed. Dr. Hensley and Colonel Morrison believe my death will end the investigation and shield their names. They are wrong. I have hidden the evidence that will bring justice. Let this be a warning: those who trade human life for profit will be hunted by the truth. The dead have longer memories than the living. The revelation sent shockwaves through what remained of the investigation. Dr. Hensley, believed to have been cooperating with authorities, was found living under an alias in Charleston and arrested. Colonel Morrison, a Union Army medical officer who had once purchased Chamberlain's data, was also found and brought to trial. Both were convicted and executed for their roles in the conspiracy. With that, the final chapter of the Chamberlain cotton mill was closed. But its legacy endured. The revelation spurred reforms that would shape American medicine for the next century. New laws established federal oversight of human experimentation. Ethical review boards were created. Patients gained the right to informed consent. International conventions eventually followed. And in Gallatin, the site of the mill was never rebuilt. It remained an empty field, a quiet scar on the land, a place where silence speaks, a place where justice once buried rose from the ashes. Today, the land where the Chamberlain cotton mill once stood is no longer silent. The city of Gallatin purchased the property and transformed it into a memorial park, a place of peace and reflection where trees now rise, where looms once spun cotton and screams were muffled by stone walls. Along Bledsoe Creek, a simple plaque marks the spot where a boy named Caleb Craven first noticed the wagons that carried secrets too terrible to remain hidden. Caleb lived to be 93 years old. In the decades after the fire, he became a respected journalist and tireless advocate for government transparency. He never married. When asked why, he would simply say the truth he'd seen in that place had shown him too much about the human capacity for evil. But those who knew him spoke of a man shaped by fire, not broken by it. A man whose moral courage, forged in his youth, became a guiding light for generations who followed. Rebecca Sutton went on to live a very different life. She married a fellow survivor and raised 5 children, each of them drawn to paths of service. Physicians, teachers, advocates. She often said her time in captivity taught her that the most important human trait isn't intelligence or strength. It's the willingness to act when it matters, regardless of what it costs. The story of the Chamberlain cotton mill stands as more than a tale of horror. It is a warning that evil does not always wear the face of monsters. Sometimes it smiles, offers you a job, and hides behind words like progress and science. Sometimes it builds its empire on respectability while burying its victims under unmarked soil. But courage, even from the young and overlooked, can shine a light bright enough to burn through that darkness. This story reminds us that the most dangerous crimes are often committed by those who claim they're necessary, that their victims are unfortunate, but expendable. The greatest horrors in history didn't happen in secret. They happened in plain sight, defended by people who insisted it was all for the greater good. So what do you think? Was everything really uncovered? Or might there be other places, other names, other networks that escape the fire and remain hidden? Even now, leave a comment below. We want to hear your thoughts. And if this tale of courage, sacrifice, and uncovered truth spoke to you, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share it with someone who needs to know that justice sometimes starts with a single question asked by a child who refused to look away. We'll see you in the next video, where we explore another forgotten corner of American history that someone somewhere didn't want you to remember. Thank you all very much for watching my video until the end. I sincerely appreciate it, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.